The planting of the Apollo flags has given conspiracy theorists what they believe is their trump card.
What I see is a flutter which is caused by variable wind pressures. So the picture could not have been taken on the moon no matter what the apologists say. Either that or the moon has a breeze.
Despite all their preparations on Earth, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin didn't know what to expect as they got ready to plant the flag.
Putting the flag on the moon was really a symbolic highlight of the mission. It was one that we had not really rehearsed. Neil knew where the flag was stowed. We brought it out, then we had to put the two pieces together.
It won't go up. Leave that in it.
The astronauts had to drive the flagstaff into the hard lunar surface with a twisting motion. A horizontal aluminum rod kept the flag suspended.
And this caused the free end of the flag to flip up and back in response to that. Also, this is an aluminum tube, very similar to the ones used on the Apollo mission. It's very springy. If I cause it to spring and then let go of it, we see that this motion continues long after I've let go of it.
On Earth, air resistance dampens this pendulum motion. But on the lunar surface, there's no air to slow the flag and stop it from waving.
Most obvious evidence the flag was on the moon and not in any air is that whenever people walked by it, it didn't move at all. It only moved when someone was working with the staff or letting go as it rocked back and forth. It didn't billow like it was being hit by a burst of air. It swung back and forth like maybe a sheet of chainmail would. Try it yourself. Try this at home.
Conspiracy theorists point to another strange anomaly, one that can't be explained by lack of atmosphere. As the 16-ton landing craft touched down, its rockets should have blasted away the top layer of dust, exposing the rocky lunar surface. But clearly, footprints are visible beneath the spacecraft, and there seems to be no dust on the landing pads.
This enormously powerful jet of flame and heat and gas, it would have easily scooped up an enormous crater. In fact, there was supposition that the crater would have been so big that the lunar lander would have disappeared into it.
Ralph Rene has devised an experiment to illustrate his claim that the rocket-powered lander should have left a crater. By his calculations, the lunar module's rocket is 26 times more powerful than a garden leaf blower. And if this can leave a crater in a gravel pit, then so should a spacecraft with 10,000 pounds of thrust.
They didn't move dry dust, they didn't move little rocks, they didn't move anything. So the demonstration is to show that this stuff will disappear immediately, and I'll even be able to gouge some kind of a hole. Come here, I haven't used you in a long time. Here we go.
If Rene is correct, the lunar surface, like the gravel pit, would show visible signs of disturbance.
When it actually landed, the dust was all still there. Now, how can that be? You know, if you blow dust away, it goes away, like I just did here. I swept the ground.
But on approach, the Eagle had reduced its power to 25%. As it glided into land, the gentle forward motion further lessened the thruster's impact on the lunar surface. And a closer inspection of some of the photos reveals that the landing did, in fact, disturb a very fine layer of dust, but not enough to cover the landing pads. But dust is not the only element missing from the photographic evidence. With no weather on the moon, one would expect a spectacular view of space, yet there are no stars in the Apollo photographs.
Back then, fortunately for me and us who are trying to break this thing out the truth, they took no pictures of the stars.
Bill Kaysing is convinced this was a conscious decision on NASA's part.
Astronomers could have easily discerned that the star positions were not those that would have appeared in a photograph taken from the moon. So it's another case where they could not fake it so they simply ignored it. If you were to talk to Aldrin or Armstrong or any of the other Apollo astronauts, they would actually not respond in any way to questions regarding stars.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics.
I asked Neil Armstrong whether he saw stars because I knew everybody else was asking. I knew the answer, of course. The point is that the eyes aren't adapted to that.
The human eye reacts to light by opening and closing the iris. In bright light, the iris becomes smaller. In the dark, it widens. On the moon, the eye, like the camera aperture, can't adjust to the brightness of the lunar surface and the darkness of space at the same time.
If you were to stand in a floodlit stadium or under a streetlight in a city, you would have the same effect. If you looked up, you wouldn't see many stars at all.
Even our own television camera can't adjust to the extreme contrast. On our moon set, Jay Winley plans an experiment in the hopes of disproving one of the conspiracy theorists' key arguments.
We're going to find out that if we use an identical camera loaded with identical film and we shoot pictures of the night sky, we won't get stars. Okay, I'm going to take a shot here. You'll notice here I'm not using any sort of a viewfinder. I'm just aiming.
Will Jay's experiment be enough to invalidate the conspiracy theorists' arguments? The morning after the shoot, the negatives are developed at a professional processing laboratory in Los Angeles.
In our experiment in the desert, we shot a variety of photographs using different film formats. In this 35mm photograph, we see that the shadows of the crew members in our single light source very distinctly converge together. In fact, there's almost a 90-degree difference in the apparent shadow direction. In this photograph here, we see the effects of terrain on the shadows. The hills change the apparent direction of shadows. The astronaut's shadow here falls in one direction. The shadow of the crew falls in yet another direction because of the hill.
These results directly contradict the conspiracy claims.
Like the Apollo astronauts, we had to guess at our focusing distances and our exposure settings. And because we had no viewfinder, we had to guess at the direction the camera was pointing. And you can clearly see that even with those handicaps, we were able to take quite usable photographs. You can immediately see that there are no stars in this photograph, even though the stars were very bright during our experiment. They're simply too dim to be registered on film at the exposure levels that we use to take these photographs.
The results of our photographic experiment appear to be overwhelming. But the mysterious image of this rock in an Apollo 16 photograph seems to back up conspiracy claims that all the moon landings were faked.
It's a rock that obviously was made out of paper mache, and very clearly on the rock is the letter C.
In Ralph Renee's mind, the C rock should be called the C prop.
Somebody told me that in Hollywood, when they do a set, the set manager comes around and drops cards on the ground, and it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, or 1 to 10 or whatever, and the prop men, whatever you call these people, they come out and they put that particular prop over the card. But in Hollywood, they're smart enough to turn the thing upside down so you can't see the mark on the prop.
NASA explains the photo was a misprint. The letter C is nothing more than a hair on the negative. But this explanation doesn't satisfy magazine publisher Marcus Allen. He believes it's impossible that any of these photographs could survive a journey to the moon and back.
In an unprotected camera, in unprotected environment, and the films that were in photographs we have seen as a result of that, it demonstrates absolutely no radiation damage whatsoever.
In 1998, IMAX began production on a film about construction of the International Space Station.
They flew the cameras up in the space shuttle with their magazines attached, and the IMAX cameras take 70mm roll film, incidentally the same film as was used in the Hasselblad still cameras on Apollo. This film had to be protected, and it was carried up in lead-lined boxes.
According to conspiracy theorists, radiation was the final insurmountable obstacle. Not only would it destroy film, it would kill the astronauts. The Earth's magnetic field protects our planet from high doses of radiation, but beyond this zone, deep in space, is where conspiracy theorists believe astronauts would be vulnerable to radiation's deadly effects.
The moon is irradiated by the sun constantly with terrible heat, and of course there's cosmic radiation, and then there are micrometeorites that travel 60,000 miles an hour that would go right through the camera, the film, and of course the astronauts themselves.
While the odds against a micrometeoroid hitting an astronaut are believed to be extremely low, any puncture would be decidedly uncomfortable.
After leaving the Earth's atmosphere, the astronauts rocketed through the Van Allen belts.
Van Allen, he said it was a sea of deadly radiation. You would pick up a death dose just about the time you got through the Van Allen shield. You'd be cooked and you'd be dying.
These radioactive belts form a thick ring encircling the equator, thinning out around the North and South poles.
Until they get an engine that'll lift the life capsule surrounded by 6 feet of water or equivalent mass of lead, they don't even dare go through the Van Allen shield.
In fact, Dr. Van Allen, who's still alive, makes no secret of the fact that he thinks these stories about killer radiation are silly. Entertaining but preposterous is his words. And the reason is that the radiation levels there are not enough to hurt you unless you stay there for a long time. Van Allen says about a month.
NASA claims the astronauts endured only a brief exposure, penetrating the thinnest section of the belts in 1 hour. But once they crossed through, they faced an even greater danger.
So here we have these clowns running around in tinfoil craft, stopping solar radiation. And I'm not talking about the light, I'm talking about the radiation from the solar storms.
You put a man in a powerful solar flare, he's dead. End of story. He is dead, unless he carries protection.
These eruptions from the sun can knock out satellites and electricity grids on Earth. But they can also be detected by an early warning computer system.
Solar flares are one of those things that you have to take a calculated risk on, because they will zap you with radiation once they get to you, but you've got a long time, hours if not a day or more, to either come back to Earth, find a shielded place, or prepare yourself.
Astronauts could only rely on their spaceship to survive a solar flare.
And they had plans for this. The plan was to turn the bulky end of the ship toward the incoming front of radiation. That bulk of the ship and all the fuel in it would provide plenty of protection for that burst of radiation.
For conspiracy theorists, radiation is the final nail in the coffin. They believe the astronauts could never have survived a trip to the moon and back. But it may also provide the key to unlocking secrets from the lunar surface itself. Can radiation supply the definitive answer to the question, did we really land on the moon? In total, the Apollo missions brought back over 382 kilograms of lunar soil and rock. These samples were distributed to laboratories all over the world. At the independent Berkeley Geochronology Center in California, geologist Paul Rene has been studying lunar rock samples for the last 10 years. His main interest is these tiny glass spherules from the moon's surface, created by the intense heat of a meteorite impact.
The spherules that we've been analyzing are tiny balls of glass, so they're like magma that we find on the Earth in that sense. but they've cooled very, very quickly, and so they form a essentially uniform glass sphere.
But unlike spherules found in Earth's solid volcanic lava, the moon's lack of terrestrial gravity results in spherules which are larger and more round.
In this copper disk, we have loaded 145 of these lunar spherules. This copper disk will then be loaded into a sample chamber, which you can see here.
Using a laser heating system to release gases locked inside the spherules, Paul Rene looks for evidence of cosmic radiation to uncover clues about their age and place of origin.
The lunar materials that we've analyzed and that others have analyzed show evidence of having been bombarded by cosmic radiation, and which we don't see on Earth because we have an atmosphere that really shields them very effectively.
Rene has determined the spherules date back 3.9 billion years. This finding eliminates the possibility that they originated on Earth.
The oldest glass I'm aware of on the Earth, anywhere, is about 165 million years old. So the Earth, with its very dynamic environment, does not tend to preserve these glassy objects, whereas the Moon, being essentially dead from a thermal point of view, does tend to preserve these things. The results that we obtained are absolutely definitively proof of a lunar origin. I can say with utmost assurance that they were derived from the Moon.